A mother called the police station and told them she was scared for her daughter. She said it clearly. She said it on a recorded line. She said those words out loud to a deputy who was paid to protect people. "I would hate to wake up to a morning report with my daughter lost somewhere." And the deputy told her not to worry. He told her that while Mitrice was in their custody, she was safe. But Mitrice Richardson was not safe. By the time her mother made the decision to stay home, Mitrice's safety was already in someone else's hands. And within hours, she would be alone in the dark. Without a phone. Without money. Without any way to get home. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department had released a 24-year-old woman at 12:15 in the morning into the most vulnerable circumstances imaginable. And they had told her mother everything was fine. 16 years have passed since that night. Over a decade of silence since Mitrice Richardson walked out of the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station and vanished. Her case is still technically open. The questions have never been fully answered. And the last person who fought loudest for the truth, her mother, Lattice, died in September of 2025 at the age of 57, still waiting. This is Mitrice Richardson's story. And at Unsolved Chapters, we do not let stories like this one disappear. If cases like this matter to you, subscribe to Unsolved Chapters. Stories like Mitrice only stay alive when people refuse to look away. To understand what happened to Mitrice Richardson, you have to start at the beginning. Not the night she disappeared. The beginning of her life. Because Mitrice Richardson was not just a case file. She was a specific, remarkable, fully formed human being. Her life deserves to be told from the ground up. Mitrice Richardson was born in 1985. Her mother, Lattice, was finishing her senior year of high school when Mitrice came into the world. Lattice and Mitrice's father, Michael, had met as teenagers. Young and in love. Trying to figure out what life was supposed to look like when you were barely old enough to navigate it yourself. They were living in Los Angeles. A community that in the 1980s was carrying the full consequences of economic disinvestment and the crack cocaine epidemic. It was a hard place to be young and starting out. Michael got drawn into selling drugs. The pull of fast money in a community with few alternatives. But that life has consequences, and they arrived quickly. Not long after Mitrice was born, Michael was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Suddenly, Lattice was navigating young motherhood alone. But Lattice was not the kind of person who let circumstances write her story. She graduated. She worked. She rebuilt. She remarried. She built a business providing legal services. And in 1993, when Mitrice was 8 years old, Lattice made a decision that tells you everything about her as a mother. She looked at the environment her daughter was growing up in. She looked at the future she wanted for her. A deliberate decision. A loving one. Written in the form of a zip code change. And it worked. Mitrice thrived. She was active and creative. She was full of a personality that people remembered. In middle school, she was a cheerleader, energetic and present. But as she moved through high school, dance became the center of her world. She danced with the kind of commitment that tells you a person has found their truest language. Her aunt described her as a princess. Someone who did not like to get dirty. Who preferred being inside, dancing or writing in her journal, while other kids played outside. There was a thoughtful, contemplative interior life to Mitrice. It ran deep alongside that expressive dancer exterior. And academically, she was exceptional. After high school, she enrolled at California State University, Fullerton. She majored in psychology. She did not just attend. She graduated with honors in 2008. A young woman from moved to the San Gabriel Valley by a mother who refused to accept limits. She crossed that graduation stage having earned every distinction attached to her name. After graduation, she began interning with a local psychologist. Someone who believed in her future in the field. Graduate school was next. That was the plan. Internship. Application. Career. She was doing everything right. Around that time, she was also living more fully into her identity. She came out to her family and began a relationship with a young woman named Tessa. By every account, she was open and proud and happy. By 2009, Mitrice was living back in Watts with her great-grandmother, Mildred. She was still interning. She was working a clerical job to support herself. She was building her life, block by block. And then something shifted. By August of 2009, the people closest to Mitrice began to notice a change. It started subtly. Easy to explain away the first time. Then harder to ignore. Mitrice had developed a fixation on a woman she had met at a club where she danced. She was interested in this woman, but the woman was already in a relationship. What followed troubled the people who knew Mitrice. Her response was not proportionate. The intensity of her focus grew. At one point, Mitrice drove alone from Los Angeles all the way to Las Vegas to attend this woman's birthday party. Uninvited. Hundreds of miles for someone who had told her they were not interested. Around that same time, Mitrice's presence on social media changed. Her posts on MySpace became long and fragmented. Disjointed. The voice people recognized was shifting into something they did not recognize. And then the text messages to her mother started. In the days before Mitrice was last seen, Lattice received a series of texts that immediately activated a mother's instinct. She could feel that something was wrong. She wrote to Mitrice asking directly what was going on. She said Mitrice had been elusive and philosophical. She asked if her daughter was sad, if she felt lost or helpless or rejected. Mitrice's response did not answer those questions. It opened a window into a mental landscape that was entirely unfamiliar. Mitrice wrote about being drawn to find her way to the White House to talk to the Obamas. The messages were vivid and expansive and completely untethered from reality. Lattice asked her to call. Mitrice did not call. She sent another message instead. She wrote that she felt joy. That everything has to die to live. She said she had to prove what she called the unlogic. Mitrice had no known prior history of mental illness. None. This was not a pattern her family had ever seen. It arrived without warning in a young woman who had been high-functioning and clear-headed all her life. Her family was frightened. They did not have the vocabulary to name what they were seeing, but they knew it was serious. Within days of those messages, the night that would change everything arrived. It was Wednesday, September the 16th, 2009. A coworker later reported that they had seen Mitrice at work that day. They said she seemed happier than usual. She stayed briefly, left for lunch, and never came back. Later that afternoon, she returned to her home with Mildred. She did not stay long. She left again without saying where she was going. At some point that evening, Mitrice got behind the wheel of her Honda Civic. She drove west, out of South Los Angeles, through the canyons, all the way to Malibu. Malibu was not a place Mitrice was known to go. She had no connections there. Why she drove there that night has never been explained. When she arrived, she pulled into the valet at Joffrey's, an upscale restaurant above the Pacific Coast Highway. And the moment she stepped out of her car, something was visibly wrong. The valet asked what brought her there. Mitrice's response was one word, subliminal. And then she said something about avenging the death of Michael Jackson. The valet could see that this young woman was off. Not dangerous, but unusual. He parked her car but gave the hostess a quiet warning. Just a heads up. Mitrice was seated. She ordered a Kobe steak and a drink. For a brief period, things appeared normal. But not long after, Mitrice got up from her table. She walked over to a group of strangers and sat down with them without invitation. She began trying to engage them in conversation. What she said did not make sense. She rambled. She told them she was from Mars. The group eventually finished and left. That is when things moved past unusual into something more urgent. When it came time for Mitrice to pay, she headed toward the exit. The manager stopped her. The bill was $89. Mitrice told him she believed the strangers she had been sitting with had covered it. They had not. As the manager tried to work through the situation, her behavior escalated. She told him she was from Mars. She said she was busted. And then she offered to pay for the meal with sex. Staff pulled a joint from her pocket. The manager made the call to law enforcement. They described a young woman possibly on drugs. They asked for someone to come pick her up. Deputies were on their way. In the years since, the manager has spoken about the guilt he carries over that decision. Staff debated what to do. At one point, they discussed covering the bill themselves. But they were concerned. They believed she should not get back behind the wheel of a car. Yet while they waited for deputies, Mitrice called her great-grandmother Mildred. Hearing that her great-granddaughter was in trouble, Mildred offered to pay the bill right then, over the phone. The restaurant declined. They cited a signature issue. Think about that for a moment. A family member offered to resolve the situation immediately. The restaurant said no. Accepting that payment and waiting for family would have accomplished everything. Mitrice would have been with people who loved her. The situation would have been over. Instead, the call to law enforcement was maintained. The deputies arrived. And the trajectory of Mitrice Richardson's life moved toward its end. The deputies conducted a field sobriety test. Mitrice passed. She was not legally intoxicated. They asked her why she was there. She told them she had been drawn by the lights. They searched her Honda Civic. They found a small amount of marijuana and her identification. There was no clear documentation of a phone, a wallet, or any money. Mitrice was placed under arrest and transported to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station. Her car was impounded. The arresting deputy's report described a standard booking. No unusual observations. No note of strange statements. No indication that anything about Mitrice suggested a mental health crisis. The decision not to invoke a psychiatric hold was not a neutral choice. It was a decision with consequences. And those consequences were fatal. If you're still here, type "Justice for Mitrice" in the comments. Let her name be seen. Now let us talk about what happened inside the station. Those hours are surrounded by unanswered questions. When Mitrice arrived, she did not have her phone. Without it, she knew only one phone number by heart, Mildred's. Police later claimed that Mitrice tried to call Mildred multiple times. They said staff overheard her speaking as if in conversation. But Mildred has been consistent. Her phone never rang. Not once. And at 12:15 in the morning, the door opened. Mitrice Richardson was released. No car. No phone. No money. No identification. No one waiting for her. The Lost Hills Sheriff's Station sits in an area that is remote. Isolated. At 12:15 in the morning, it would have been deserted. The terrain is the edge of the Santa Monica Mountains. It is beautiful in daylight, but dangerous in the dark for someone without resources. The official account says the jailer encouraged Mitrice to stay. They say she refused. But her family was initially told something completely different. They were told she was released due to overcrowding. Two different explanations. Neither one addresses why it was acceptable to release a vulnerable woman into isolated terrain at midnight. When Lattice woke up and called the station at 5:30 in the morning, she was told her daughter had already been released. Her daughter, who she had been told was safe, already gone. At around 6:30 in the morning, a man named Bill Smith made a 911 call. He reported a strange woman on his property in Cold Canyon. She was sitting on the wooden steps at the back of his house. He said she was a tall, slim black woman with an afro. It was Mitrice. At 6:30 in the morning, 6 hours after her release, Mitrice Richardson was alive. By the time deputies were dispatched, Mitrice had already left. She had moved on. Further into the terrain. Further from help. 2 full days passed before the department initiated a formal search. 2 days. When the search finally began, deputies used scent dogs. But they chose to begin the trail at Bill Smith's property instead of the station. The dogs found footprints consistent with Mitrice's sneakers. The prints suggested she had been running. The trail was eventually lost. For reasons that have never been explained, deputies did not continue further down that trail. They simply stopped following it. As weeks turned into months, law enforcement defended their actions. But 3 days after Mitrice's disappearance, Lieutenant Scott Chu sent an email to his supervisor. It directly contradicted the department's public position. He described Mitrice as acting unusual, a little ditzy. He noted that the arresting officer felt uneasy about her. And then Lieutenant Chu denied writing it. He said he did not remember it. The email exists. The denials exist. This was an institution whose internal record suggested that something had gone wrong. In July of 2010, the Office of Independent Review released a report. It was not thorough. Key details were missing. Lieutenant Chu's email was absent. Investigators did not even interview the deputies or the jailer who were actually there that night. And then August arrived. Park rangers checking an abandoned marijuana grow site in Dark Canyon found human remains. They were 8 miles from the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station. Approximately 2 miles from Bill Smith's property. The recovery of her body was a disaster. Deputies moved her remains before the coroner could examine the scene. This violated standard protocol. Her clothes, her jeans, her bra, her belt, were found hundreds of feet away. The jeans were untorn. The belt was still intact. Authorities suggested animal activity or groundwater had unbuckled the belt and moved the items. For Mitrice's family, that did not make sense. It still does not. The official ruling on the cause of death? Undetermined. For 16 years, Latisse Sutton fought for her daughter. She made the calls. She pushed for reviews. She raised a daughter who graduated with honors and then watched the system let her walk into the dark. Latisse died in September of 2025. She was 57. She died without the answers she deserved. She died still wondering what happened in the hours after Mitrice was released. The institution that owed her the truth let her die waiting. Mitrice Richardson was a dancer. She had a journal. She had a plan for the future. She was 24 years old, and she had everything ahead of her. She was found in Dark Canyon 8 miles away, 11 months after being released into the night. And that is where we leave Mitrice Richardson's chapter tonight. But this chapter is not closed. It will not be closed until someone is held accountable. It will not be closed until the truth of what happened in Dark Canyon is fully known. So if this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Share this video. Tell someone her name. Because the more people who hear the name Mitrice Richardson, the harder it becomes for this case to stay buried. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, subscribe to Unsolved Chapters. We will keep asking the questions that have not been answered. And we will keep saying the names that should never be forgotten. This is Unsolved Chapters. We will see you in the next chapter.